Before we drop into the dark of this story, take a heartbeat and decide where you stand. If you believe one choice can tilt a galaxy, tap like. If you think monsters are born and not made, tell me in the comments. And if you want more human stubbornness colliding with cosmic fear, subscribe and stay close. Now let's open the door the galaxy begged to keep shut. Revik Val had been paid to watch a cage, not to judge what lived inside it. The distinction mattered to him. Judging led to hesitation, and hesitation was how mercenaries died. The station drifted above a star stripped to embers, its orbit chosen because nothing living lingered here long enough to listen. No trade lanes, no witnesses, no names on the manifests. Only a designation stamped into every corridor light. X9. The cage occupied the heart of the station like a swallowed sun. Fields of force layered upon alloy lattices braided with restraints older than Revik's species. Engineers from half a dozen civilizations had argued over those chains for centuries, refining them, praising them, fearing them. The thing inside remained still. That was the first lie Revik noticed. Stillness was not calm. Stillness was waiting. He had seen predators on 100 worlds. Razor-beaked sky hunters. Acid-veined tunnel kings. War beasts bred to scream themselves blind. This was none of those. The creature filled the chamber without pressing against it, as if it respected the boundary. Plates of living armor caught the light and returned it muted, thoughtful. Its eyes followed Revik, not with hunger, but with recognition that made his pulse misbehave. A researcher spoke behind him, voice filtered through layers of confidence and fear. Do not approach the field. It maps intent. Revik nodded and took one step closer anyway. Intent was the one thing he still trusted himself to carry cleanly. He was human, male, built for violence by a homeworld that learned early how to survive invaders and itself. The galaxy called humans mercenaries now. It was easier than admitting they were adaptable. The file in his wrist display scrolled without end. Extinction tallies. Fleet losses. Systems gone dark and never repopulate. Every line ended with the same phrase. Containment successful. Revik wondered how many lives that sentence cost every year. Why keep it alive? He asked, not expecting an answer. The researcher gave him a practiced smile. Because fear is efficient. The creature shifted then, a small movement that rippled through the chamber like a held breath released. The restraints tightened in response, biting into armor and flesh alike. Revik's jaw set. He had worn cuffs like that once, on a prison moon where gravity broke men before guards did. The memory tasted like rust. An alarm chimed, polite as a lie. A rival faction had found the station. Their signatures bloomed across the tactical display in aggressive reds. Boarding torpedoes punched into the outer ring. Somewhere, something exploded with professional enthusiasm. Stay at your post, the researcher said. If containment fails, you know the protocol. Revik knew it. Vent the chamber. Kill the asset. Save the data. It was neat, clean, and cowardly. He felt the station shudder again, closer now. The lights dimmed, then steadied. The creature's eyes never left him. When the first shot hit the chamber wall, the force fields flared. The restraints screamed in a language of stress and sacrifice. The creature did not thrash. It lowered its head, not in submission but in restraint of its own. Revik felt something in his chest answer that motion, a recognition older than training. The researcher swore as consoles went dark. We are losing control. Revik moved. He crossed the last meters to the field and placed his hand against the invisible barrier. It was warm. Alive. The creature leaned closer until the space between them hummed with potential. Images brushed his mind, not forced, not invasive. Stars collapsing into order. Wars halted not by annihilation but by presence. A role imposed and then betrayed. Don't, the researcher said, voice cracking. You have no idea what that thing is. Revik did. Not fully but enough. It was a mirror the galaxy refused to look into. He glanced at the protocol timer counting down, at the red certainty of obedience. He thought of Earth, of how humanity had survived by refusing simple answers. He thought of chains. The next explosion cut the chamber in half. Power failed. The field flickered. The restraints slackened for a heartbeat that could have ended everything. Revik made his choice. He slammed his override into the nearest restraint node and rerouted the power into the field itself. The chains fell away with a sound like a held scream finally allowed. The creature rose, unfolding with terrible grace, filling the chamber not with violence, but with presence that bent the air. Everyone waited for Revik to die. The creature turned its massive head and lowered it until their foreheads nearly touched, field humming between them. Gratitude was too small a word for what passed there. Acknowledgement fit better. Sirens wailed into hysteria. Automated defenses spun up and then shut down as if reconsidering their life choices. Revik backed away slowly, heart hammering, mind clear. He did not run. Neither did the creature attack. Containment breach confirmed, the station announced, calm and useless. All personnel evacuate. Revik sprinted for his ship as the station tore itself apart behind him. The creature followed, not chasing, not fleeing, simply choosing. As they cleared the hangar, the void opened like a promise the galaxy had forgotten it ever made. Behind them a prison burned. Ahead pursuit would come. Revik Val did not know how long he had bought the universe or what it would cost. He only knew that the galaxy had mistaken chains for control, and that mistake had just been corrected. If you felt the weight of that choice, tell me below. Was Revik right, or did he doom everything? Stay with me. The stars are already moving. The alarms followed Revik into open space, their echoes ghosting through his cockpit long after the station vanished behind him. His ship was small, ugly, and honest, a mercenary cutter held together by favors and stubborn engineering. It should not have been able to outrun the first wave of interceptors, yet its drives burned hotter than spec, as if the universe itself had decided to look the other way. The creature occupied the cargo bay, crouched with a precision that respected the ship's limits. Revik did not need a camera feed to know where it was. He felt it the way sailors felt storms through their bones. Not threatening. Not passive. Present. Every system diagnostic flickered, recalibrating around a mass that refused to be categorized. Hull integrity stable, the ship announced, uncertain. Unknown variable detected. Get used to it, Revik muttered, fingers dancing over the console. He plotted a jump vector toward empty space, not safety. Safety had become a rumor. The first pursuit fleet translated in behind him with all the subtlety of a hammer. Coalition colors, mercenary flags, private vengeance wrapped in official authority. They did not hail him. They did not need to. The galaxy had already decided what he was. A warning shot lanced past his bow, close enough to blister paint. Revik smiled without humor. He had been chased before. What changed everything was the way the creature lifted its head at the impact, eyes narrowing not in fear, but in calculation. The ship trembled as something ancient stretched, testing boundaries not meant to hold it. Easy, Revik said, unsure whether the word was for himself or the being behind him. He felt a brush against his thoughts again, lighter this time. Curiosity. Assessment. The creature was not asking permission. It was measuring restraint. The second volley came faster, meaner. Shields flared and collapsed. Revik swore and rolled the ship hard, letting inertia do what armor could not. A missile locked on, eager and blind. He saw the moment it would hit and accepted it with a mercenary's clarity. The creature moved. It did not roar. It did not charge. It extended something like a limb, space bending around it as if remembering an older rule. The missile vanished, not exploded, simply removed from the equation. The pursuing ships faltered, formation unraveling as their targeting system screamed nonsense. Revik stared at the readouts, breath shallow. You could have done that back there, he said quietly. A response brushed his mind, calm and heavy. There were boundaries. There always had been. The nearest pursuer fired again, panic bleeding into its tactics. The creature answered with precision that felt almost merciful. Energy arced, sculpted rather than released, slicing through engines and weapon arrays while leaving hulls intact. Ships spun, dead in space, crews alive to carry stories the galaxy would not want to hear. Silence followed, thick and disbelieving. Revik did not cheer. He set a new course and jumped before courage returned to his enemies. The void folded, unfolded, and spat them into a system no chart bothered to name. A dead rock circled a dim star, useless and forgotten. He cut the engines and let the ship drift. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. You didn't have to save me, he said, voice rough. Could have left me as an example. The creature shifted closer, careful again. Images surfaced, clearer now. Chains. Watching stars burn because intervention had been forbidden. The cost of obedience measured in extinction events. Revik understood without words. This being did not value him because he was powerful. It valued him because he had acted without certainty. Name's Revik, he said. Human. The creature offered something in return, not a name but a concept. Role. A function twisted by imprisonment. Guardian. Regulator. Apex, not as tyrant but as threshold. Revik laughed softly. Figures. Galaxy loves putting labels on things it doesn't understand. The moment did not last. Long-range sensors flared to life, picking up transmissions rippling across known space. The pursuit had become a hunt. Bounties layered upon bounties. Entire species issuing edicts wrapped in theology and terror. Revik watched the data scroll and felt a familiar cold settle in his gut. "They're going to come harder," he said. "They'll burn systems just to corner us." The creature did not deny it. Instead, it shared a vision that made Revik's hands still. A cascade of futures branching and collapsing. Some ended with fire. Others with silence worse than death. A few glimmered with something like balance, fragile and earned. In all of them, humans stood at a crossroads, not as conquerors but as participants. "They're afraid of you," Revik said. "Of what you represent." Fear radiated back but not its own. The creature showed him councils hiding behind containment protocols, using monsters as excuses to rule. The truth settled heavy and ugly. This had never been about safety. It had been about control. A signal broke through the static, tight-beamed and deliberate. Not a demand. An invitation. Coordinates attached, old and encrypted, carrying the weight of secrets buried on purpose. Revik recognized the signature style of those who traded in absolutes. "They want to talk," he said. "Which means they're deciding whether to kill us before or after." The creature inclined its head, an echo of the gesture that had sealed their alliance. Not trust. Understanding. Revik powered up the engines, eyes fixed on the dark ahead. He was a mercenary, a human, and now the fulcrum of a decision the galaxy had avoided for millennia. Behind him, the apex being waited, not as a weapon but as a witness. The hunt had begun, and for the first time in a long while, Revik suspected the galaxy might finally learn what it felt like to be afraid for the right reasons. The stars blurred as Revik's cutter dove deeper into uncharted systems, but the calm was a lie the void played on him. Sensors screamed a warning before he could see the first wave materialize. Fleets, not small fleets but armadas, spilled from folding space like predators smelling fresh blood. Coalition colors dominated the formation, but mercenary flags and rogue guilds flickered through the ranks, each vying for glory or revenge. The galaxy had decided it wanted the predator, and it wanted Revik even more. Revik adjusted the throttles, letting the ship drift with uncanny precision. He had seen impossible maneuvers in his career, but nothing matched the presence behind him. The predator moved through the ship's hold with calculated restraint, its armor glinting under emergency lights. It did not question the threat. It cataloged it. Every enemy formation, every weapon signature, every approaching trajectory fed into some ancient calculus Revik could barely comprehend. A warning ping shrieked from the sensor array, closer than expected. "Small craft," Revik muttered. "Multiple targets." He scanned the readouts. Interceptors swarmed toward him like insects drawn to light, fast and disposable. He knew better than to try a fight on his own. Every instinct screamed survival, but he had learned long ago that instincts were often the wrong measure against the extraordinary. The first volley struck the cutter's shields. Energy arcs scythed across the hull, leaving sizzling tracks and a scent of ozone. Revik's hands flew across the console. He braced for impact, but the predator acted first. It extended a limb or perhaps a field of presence that bent the trajectories of the incoming missiles. There was no roar, no rage, only precision. The interceptors found themselves torn apart or sent tumbling into the void. Crew cries from the destroyed vessels echoed faintly through comm channels, ignored by their own fleets as chaos claimed them. Revik exhaled, a bitter laugh escaping. "You really don't need me, do you?" The reply was an image, the apex being showing paths of destruction it could enact, then deliberately withdrawing. No unnecessary slaughter. Every calculated move emphasized intelligence over raw power, a brutal artistry that Revik had never witnessed. Another squadron broke formation, trying flanking maneuvers. Revik predicted their path and maneuvered accordingly. The predator mirrored him, shifting subtly, calculating outcomes faster than any human mind could comprehend. The ship became less a vehicle and more a conduit for two wills navigating the impossible. Together, they struck with precision, dismantling engines, disabling weapons, and leaving crews alive to carry the stories that would haunt the galaxy. The battle stretched across minutes that felt like hours. Revik realized that the predator was teaching him without words, illustrating patience, assessment, and controlled force. Every enemy ship that fell reinforced a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Dominance was a fleeting illusion. Intelligence, adaptability, and restraint defined survival. When the last pursuers were disabled, the cutter floated in the silent aftermath. Space was littered with wreckage and debris, dead husks suspended against the void. Revik powered down weapons, letting the ship drift. The predator crouched behind him, massive and silent, as if observing the balance it had restored. No one could have survived this reckoning alone. Together they had rewritten it. "Quiet for now," Revik murmured. "They'll come back. Bigger, smarter, angrier." He scanned the stellar horizon, noting uninhabited systems, abandoned colonies and dead worlds. The galaxy was vast, but it had its blind spots. "And when they do, we'll be ready." A subtle shift in the Predator's posture drew Revik's attention. It was not a gesture of obedience. It was a shared understanding, the acknowledgement that neither commanded the other but that together they formed something the galaxy could not anticipate or control. Intelligence, foresight, and choice replaced instinct and reflex. Revik's laughter, low and bitter, filled the cabin. Figures the galaxy never trusted this kind of thinking. The cutter's sensors caught a transmission. High priority, encrypted, and carrying the unmistakable signature of the Galactic Council. They were not speaking, they were issuing ultimatums, layered with the threat of annihilation and the cold bureaucracy of authority. Revik tapped a finger against the console. "They still think bullets solve problems." The Predator shifted closer, shoulders brushing against his seat, a silent reminder of presence, capability, and judgment. In its eyes, Revik glimpsed calculations he would never fully understand. The measured response of a being that had survived galaxies, chains, and fear without losing clarity or purpose. Revik set the ship on a course toward an uncharted cluster, lights dimmed and engines humming with intent. "We'll show them," he said softly. "Not as hunters. Not as weapons. But as a reminder." His words were neither boast nor threat. They were an acknowledgement of responsibility. The fleets would regroup. The council would escalate. Entire systems would mobilize in the name of fear and retribution. Yet for the first time, Revik felt the weight of choice rather than obligation. Survival was no longer a question of skill alone. It was a question of judgment, partnership, and the audacity to act against expectation. The Predator's gaze met his once more, brief but undeniable. It was more than alliance. It was a pact forged in chaos, tempered by intelligence and tested by fire. They were fugitives, yes, but also something else. A living paradox the galaxy could not comprehend. As the cutter slipped into unclaimed space, Revik allowed himself one final thought before focus returned to navigation. The galaxy had underestimated the bond between human resolve and apex intelligence. That underestimation would ripple across light years, a shadow no council, fleet, or law could contain. And somewhere beyond the dark, pursuing fleets already calculated their approach, unaware that they were stepping into a storm the galaxy had not yet learned to name. The hunt was far from over, but for now Revik and the Predator had won a brief, necessary peace, one that demanded the next choice be even sharper, even more deliberate. The weight of all that possibility settled around him, electric and cold, as he prepared for the chase to resume. Revik's cutter drifted through a system that charts forgot and cartographers dared not name. Asteroids spun lazily around a dim sun, casting shadows that flickered like warnings across the hull. He let the engines idle, eyes on the dimly lit controls, but it was the presence behind him that kept his attention. The apex predator, silent, patient, observing. This was no longer simply a flight from fleets or bounty hunters. It was an encounter with truths the galaxy had spent millennia burying. The predator shifted, a subtle movement that rattled the cabin's sensors, not violently but deliberately. Then, for the first time since Revik had freed it, the creature reached out, not with claws, not with force, but with the faintest projection of thought, images flickering in his mind. Civilizations rising, reaching for the stars, teetering on the edge of extinction before the predator intervened. It was not a weapon in those visions. It was a regulator, a balance, a force that preserved life by setting limits and enforcing them subtly, invisibly. Revik swallowed hard. "You weren't meant to be contained," he said, voice low, almost to himself. "You were supposed to guide them." The images sharpened. He saw fleets disintegrate, entire colonies spared because of intervention, wars prevented, species given breathing space to develop, evolve, survive. And then he saw what the galaxy had done. Cages, chains, sedatives, experiments that twisted intelligence into fear. The predator had been reduced to curiosity and terror, studied and restrained by those who claimed dominion over all. "They feared what they could not control," Revik whispered, understanding dawning with a bitter weight. "They used you as a tool, not a teacher." A subtle vibration ran through the ship as the predator's projection intensified. He glimpsed fleets of machines, vessels designed to hunt, designed to kill, but failing to predict the living intelligence they sought to dominate. The same councils, The same authorities that dictated containment were now scrambling to respond to the very intelligence they had imprisoned. Their orders were outdated, their assumptions fatal. Revik leaned back, rubbing his temples. So all this time, all this chasing, all this blood, it wasn't about you being dangerous. It was about their fear of what you represent. The predator shifted closer, massive shoulders brushing against the ship's bulk. Images shifted again, faster this time, showing humans across multiple worlds. Ordinary soldiers, diplomats, explorers. Instances where humanity had survived impossible odds, adapted, persevered, and made choices that defied logic and expectation. In every case, the predator's influence was indirect, subtle, protective. Humanity had always been on the precipice of recognition, the apex predator waiting to acknowledge them as peers, not prey. Revik exhaled sharply. So they weren't just afraid of you, they were afraid of us. They knew what we could be. A new transmission pinged the console. High encryption, a signature he recognized instantly, Galactic Council. The message was clear. Ultimatums, threats, and directives to mobilize extermination-class weapons. The galaxy had finally stopped pretending containment was an option. They were now deciding whether to burn systems or annihilate all witnesses. Revik ignored it, letting the predator's presence absorb the tension. "You're not just a fighter," he said softly. "You're something more. A teacher. A guardian. And now they want a lesson." The predator inclined its head, a subtle acknowledgement. Not compliance, not obedience, but recognition. Its thoughts brushed against his again, sharper now, warning of the paths ahead. The fleets would come, faster and deadlier than before. Entire systems could collapse under the weight of miscalculated fear. The galaxy had never understood patience, but it would be forced to learn. Revik studied the controls, realizing that their survival depended not only on speed or firepower, but on understanding, anticipation, and trust. He had been a soldier, a mercenary, a human shaped by war, but this was different. The predator did not act out of anger, desire, or revenge. It acted out of judgment, tempered by intelligence and history. Every move it made was a lesson he was only beginning to comprehend. "Then we need a plan," Revik said. "Not just to survive. To show them why chains never work." The predator responded with another projection. Not images of destruction this time, but of choice. Paths diverging, outcomes changing with minute decisions. Some endings were catastrophic. Some endings preserved life, balance, and order. In every scenario, humans were neither victims nor conquerors. They were participants. Partners. Peers in a way the galaxy refused to recognize. Revik's lips curved into a faint, wry smile. "Figures. We're not supposed to lead, just follow. But the galaxy doesn't get a say in what's coming next." He punched in coordinates toward an uncharted cluster, one that could serve as a temporary refuge, a place to recalibrate before the inevitable pursuit resumed. The predator followed without hesitation, massive and silent, a presence that demanded recognition. Together, they formed an unspoken alliance. Intelligence guided by judgment, human adaptability tempered by apex awareness. As the cutter slipped toward the cluster, Revik allowed himself one final thought before silence claimed the cabin. The galaxy had tried to define monsters, to cage regulators, to suppress intelligence. They had failed. And now they would have to contend not with a weapon, but with something far more formidable. A being that understood the balance of life, and a human who had dared to recognize it. Behind them, fleets plotted, calculations prepared, and councils debated. Yet none could foresee the full measure of what they had unleashed. Revik glanced at the predator, massive and unyielding, and felt the gravity of their purpose settle around him. The hunt was far from over, but the understanding of what they had become would shape every encounter to come. And as they vanished into unclaimed space, the stars themselves seemed to recoil, aware that the galaxy's chains had broken, and that the consequences were only beginning. The superweapon hung in orbit like a dark crown over the contested system, a monument to fear and bureaucratic hubris. Revik's cutter drifted in the shadow of its immense bulk, engines silent except for the hum of life support. The Galactic Council had thrown everything they could muster into one final act of dominance, and Revik understood the stakes better than anyone. This was not a battle of firepower. This was a reckoning, and the predator beside him was the only entity capable of enforcing judgment on a galaxy that had long forgotten the meaning of balance. The apex predator crouched in the cargo hold, massive and coiled like a living storm. Its eyes, deep and intelligent, reflected the superweapon's ominous glow. Revik studied it, noting the subtle tension in its posture, the precise way its muscles responded to every pulse of the distant engines. He had fought alongside men, aliens, and machines, but nothing he had ever known compared to the quiet mastery of this being. It was not simply strength, it was calculation, history, and judgment, all fused into a form designed to endure millennia. Revik tapped the console. "This is it," he said softly. "We either stop it or we watch every world burn." His hands hovered over the interface, but he knew the Predator did not need instructions. It understood consequences in ways he could only begin to comprehend. He had freed it from chains, but the chains that mattered now were the moral and strategic chains the galaxy had wrapped around itself. The first volley of automated defenses flared without warning. Energy arcs lanced from the superweapon's surface, precise and lethal. Revik's ship shook as shields absorbed impacts that would have destroyed anything smaller. He felt the Predator tense behind him, every movement a whisper of controlled fury. Then, with a motion almost imperceptible, it extended its awareness into the weapon's systems. Panels flickered. Turrets shuddered. Calculations went awry. Systems designed to anticipate and destroy were suddenly crippled by intelligence no programming had accounted for. Revik watched, awed. "You're not destroying it," he said, voice trembling with disbelief. "You're teaching it." The Predator responded not with sound but with presence. Energy flared, not in anger but in precise neutralization. Missiles were rerouted, shields overloaded intentionally, firing sequences jammed, not to harm the weapon, but to prove restraint could be more decisive than destruction. Revik realized in that instant that the creature's power was not just in violence, but in judgment, in shaping outcomes without unnecessary loss. Council vessels arrived in droves, warships armed to the teeth, intent on ensuring failure. Revik adjusted the cutter's position, but he no longer felt panic. He understood now that survival was irrelevant. What mattered was the scale of choice and the demonstration of consequence. Every strike the Predator executed was surgical. Ships were disabled, rendered incapable of pursuing without a single life unnecessarily extinguished. The galaxy's weaponry had become a classroom, and the Predator was the instructor. Revik's thoughts wandered briefly, tracing the path that had brought him here, from a mercenary guarding chains to a human standing beside an apex being in a crucible of judgment. He had doubted, hesitated, questioned his own instincts, yet every decision, every risk, had brought him to this precise alignment of purpose. He felt something profound. The Predator had trusted him not as a tool, not as a subordinate, but as a peer, capable of understanding consequences the galaxy refused to acknowledge. The superweapon's core glowed brighter, a silent promise of annihilation. Revik's fingers itched for the controls, but he did not move. He understood that the outcome was no longer his alone. The Predator shifted, eyes locking with his, and in that shared gaze, a silent agreement passed between them. The galaxy's arrogance would meet intelligence tempered by restraint. In a sequence of fluid motion, the Predator projected its awareness into the weapon systems again. Energy surged, spreading not to destroy but to neutralize. Turrets became inert, targeting arrays jammed, power rerouted. The weapon's core continued to pulse, but now harmless, a monument stripped of its threat. Council fleets reeled, their calculations failing against a force they could not predict. Shock spread through command channels as the realization hit. Brute power was impotent against understanding, and the Predator had enforced judgment without obliteration. Revik exhaled, a deep, unsteady breath. "They'll never see it coming," he murmured. "They'll think we're monsters, or worse that we're gods." The Predator leaned closer, a subtle ripple through its armor, and Revik felt the weight of history in that presence. It had endured chains, fear, and centuries of misunderstanding. It had judged, and now the galaxy would pay attention not to fear but to the lesson it imposed. Together, they had reshaped a conflict without bloodshed beyond what was inevitable, and every entity observing from the stars would remember the magnitude of choice. Council transmissions faltered, warships began retreating or shutting down as their systems failed, and across the void, silence settled. Revik allowed himself a faint, rare smile. Humanity had always been underestimated, feared, and misjudged. Here, beside an intelligence beyond reckoning, he had found proof of what humans could accomplish, not through domination but through audacity, insight, and collaboration. As the cutter slipped away from the neutralized weapon, the Predator followed, massive and unhurried. Revik gazed at the vessel's inert bulk, then at the stars beyond. The galaxy had survived the moment, but it had been forced to acknowledge truths it had long denied. That intelligence cannot be caged, that restraint can outmatch destruction, and that humans, when daring enough, could stand as peers to beings older and wiser than any council could comprehend. "Ready to go home?" Revok asked, his voice low but steady. He did not expect a reply in words, and he received none. The Predator's presence itself was the answer. Forward, always forward, into a galaxy unprepared for the consequences of its arrogance. The void stretched ahead, uncharted and infinite. Fleets would regroup. Councils would debate, and systems would tremble at the tales that would follow. But Revok no longer feared what they would bring. With the apex being beside him, he understood that true power did not lie in domination, destruction, or obedience. It lay in judgment, intelligence, and the courage to act where others would hesitate. And in that realization the galaxy shifted, imperceptibly but irrevocably, forever aware that chains could be broken, that fear was not a law, and that one human and one predator had rewritten what it meant to survive. The cutter accelerated, stars stretching into lines, the predator's presence a constant anchor beside him. They were fugitives, yes, but more than that, they were the embodiment of consequence, a force that the galaxy could neither ignore nor control. Revok's final thought before the engines flared fully: the galaxy had underestimated what humans could do when they chose to act with clarity, courage, and insight. And now, every star, every fleet, every council would pay attention, whether they were ready or not. The apex predator and the human mercenary vanished into the dark, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed.